Hi everybody. We're getting towards the end now. It's quite exciting. We're on chapter 32 today. Last time we left, Onk and Hearty had just found each other, and a deluge of fish had fallen from the sky, and Gristle had figured out her troll. Onk was in Thanet. Let's see where we get to today. Chapter 32. The Reunion. "You should have seen it shine," Hearty extolled, waving his arms in the air to give more emphasis to his words. Whoosh! Onk came straight up out of the drain hole with a baby dragon wrapped around him like some mystical wizard. I very nearly had a heart attack. Yes, you said so earlier," muttered Shine, not impressed in the slightest, and feeling somewhat peeved at what she thought was an over-exaggeration on Hearty's part. "And the fish! The fish! You wouldn't believe unless—" "Yes, I know. I was there. You said it before," Shine said, sick of listening to Hearty's story. She'd heard 6 variations of it already, and still he didn't stop. At least his precious Onk was back. Perhaps Hearty would settle down. She could live in hope. Shine was miffed at losing Hearty earlier that morning. She remembered one minute they were floating above the swimming pool about to go home after she'd found her fabulous gem of a windmill, and the next Hearty was gone. She admitted she'd been a teeny bit overexcited about her wonderful find, but Hearty was going on the same way about Onk. Second thoughts invaded her mind. Maybe she should listen to why he wandered off. Shine had missed the excitement on the West Cliff due to her sulking in her underground home. Used to Thanet's wet and windy weather, Shine had soak-away holes drilled at the lowest points in her home to prevent flooding. The nearby oaks helped too by drawing in any excess surface water. By the time she resurfaced from her cosy dry home to search for Hearty, the nautical harvest had vanished. She did spot a lonely pink prawn and 2 grey oysters scuttling towards the sea and wonder how they got there. She'd seen them sea-bound, safe inside the foaming tides before continuing her search. "I'll make us a nice dandelion tea to celebrate," she said, trying to compromise. "What does Onk want to eat?" she continued, trying to show Hearty she cared about him too. "Oh, don't mind Onk, he'll go off and find his own dinner when he's hungry," replied Hearty offhand. "Come to think of it, he probably won't want anything after that massive fish supper. You should have seen the amount of fish he's eaten. Did I tell you there were so many fish? Oh no," muttered Shine to herself. "Here we go again." Diverting Hearty's attention from yet another retelling of his adventure, Shine came up with a useful suggestion. "The last time Onk went off to find dinner alone, we lost him. Remember?" "Oh, yeah, I forgot about that," Hearty responded, realising his error. He dashed outside to locate Onk and get his assurance that he'd return to the West Cliff once he and Dog had eaten. Onk confirmed he would by grinning and booming, "Onk, return!" Seeing his small friend's worried expression, Onk recognised Hearty needed further reassurance. Placing the tip of his little finger on the top of Hearty's left shoulder, Onk patted him. It was supposed to be a gesture of affection from Onk's point of view. The touch was so firm Hearty felt sure his collarbone was breaking and his chest caving in. He was sore and black and blue for weeks after Onk's thoughtful gesture. Hearty was correct about food. For the first time in a very long time, Onk and Dog were replete. Strolling along the west cliff near the boating pool early that evening, Onk, like Dog, was almost purring. The sky overhead was clear and tranquil, a picture of peace, echoing Onk's contentment at having Hearty back. He smiled down at Dog, thinking that his family was almost, but not quite, complete. He stood watching Dog chase starlings off the grassy slopes that led down to the cliff edge railings. Dog returned, crunching the remains of a starling in his open mouth. Dog was definitely a one-man dragon survival team, thought Onk. It was clear he'd never starve, no matter what else happened to him. Dog had few thoughts between his ears except, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm hungry, and oh goody, another starling. While Dog harassed the starlings on the promenade, a piece of clothing stretched across one of the benches attracted Onk's eye. It was an off-white t-shirt, probably left to dry by its owner after the massive deluge. Either that, or someone had enjoyed a stretching game with it, because it was XXXL size at very least. Onk was quite taken with it. Removing his hat, he carefully lifted it from the bench, deciding to try it on. He wasn't used to clothing designed for the upper body. Up till now, he'd been more a make-it-fit wearer. Sorting the armholes from the head hole was a major accomplishment, and one that needed extreme patience on his part. Once he'd mastered its intricacies, Onk was pleased with his latest wardrobe item, even if it didn't reach his waist, but hung 1/3 up his midriff like a teenage tank top. He liked the way it covered his shoulders and caressed his back, keeping it snug. The t-shirt sported a heavy metal motif on the back, a red-faced demon glaring out from between Onk's shoulder blades. Onk felt the overall effect enhanced his status and dignity. As Onk groomed, the storm's epicentre hovered over the island, wanting to drench it further. The dark, moultainous clouds, though visible on the skyline like a heavy smear, had settled for a brief time, the main portion moving east across the countryside of cabbages, rape and potatoes. It was giving Birchington a heavy battering, or a good seeing to, as the local human Phoenician jargon said. Onk sat considering his progress as he gazed at the battle of the skies in the distance, thankful the storm was moving on. He decided he'd come a long way from the person he was, living at Hampstead Heath. He felt things, deep things, inside his chest. They were feelings he'd never noticed before. He didn't know if they'd always been there, submerged somehow, or if they'd grown out of his experiences. Despite the ache they caused, he liked them being there. There was one ache for Hearty, and one for the unborn babe, and looking down at Dog, now lolling beside him, one ache for Dog too. Together, Onk and Dog crossed the sparkling rain-kissed lawns of the West Cliff, returning to Shine's home. Armed with the information Gru had supplied, the obsessed Gristle set out once more. This time she was heading for Thanet, and Ramsgate in particular. She knew she'd find her prize there. She'd end that worthless troll's life once and for all. Behind her lay the smoky ruins of Gru the Gruesome's pitiful hovel, a small wizened toad surviving somewhere in the ashy debris. "Call me stupid, would you? Tell me to shush," muttered the unforgiving Gristle as she stamped away. "She won't be waving her hand at anyone again in a hurry," she chuckled, striding out onto the dual carriageway, heading towards Thanet. The toad, creeping out from under a torn down wall, watched Gristle leave. Gru regretted ever letting that hideous monstrosity into her beautiful home. With Gristle out of sight, Gru the toad was desperate to reach the White Witch in Hambledown. I read that wrong. With Gristle out of sight, Gru the toad was desperate to reach the White Witch at Harbledown. The Harbledown hag possessed information on the necessary transformation spell, providing a heron didn't find Gru a tasty snack on the way. Hope, the watcher, trailed after Gristle, watching in horror, as first she captured Lenny and then transmuted Gru. She saved Lenny's life when Gristle attempted to kill him by casting a safety enchantment over him. Lenny never knew. He thought his invisibility was his saviour. He didn't know. He had hope. She found Gru too, crawling amongst the rubble a few yards from her destroyed home. As a toad, it would have taken Gru months to crawl to the nearest White Witch. Luckily for both of them, Gristle's spell had turned Gru into a newly emerged baby toad. Otherwise, Hope couldn't have hoped to pick her up, and Gru would have died or forgotten her goal long before reaching it. Hope lifted Gru in her arms and carried her to the sympathetic Harbledown hag for retransformation. She didn't stay, despite the White Witch's kind invitation to rest. Gristle could walk very fast, and Hope was determined not to lose her trail, despite Gru giving her directions to Ramsgate. Doubtless she'd need to rescue more victims along the way. Gristle continued travelling at walking pace, and an angry witch moves faster. Within a few short hours, marching like a marathon walker, Gristle had covered the distance, arriving at Ramsgate outskirts a little after sundown. The town's magical folk were alive with tales of nothing else but a troll. Rumours said the troll was responsible for the storm, and in a way, they were right. The picket gnomes had seen him on the beach. The green parrots had spied him in the park. But there wasn't a single sighting that gave his precise position. In addition, there was talk of dragons. Gristle detested dragons, except to eat as a steak with a vintage claret. Thus far, in any fight, she'd always come off worse. They were impervious to spells and hexes, so it required wily cunning to defeat or subject them to one's will. Gristle was somewhat lacking in the wily cunning skills department. She tended to demand first and destroy after. It was a rather limited strategy, but she got what she wanted and could accomplish much with this you do it or die method. Gristle knew if she could separate the troll from the dragon, it would be a lot safer for her. Disguising herself as an old woman selling rosy red apples, she drifted into town. She attracted a lot of attention, dressed like a witch in a famous fairy tale, wearing a raggedy shawl, black full-length dress coat and black boots. People hadn't forgotten the last time a gypsy woman came calling with rosy red apples, and the subsequent effect on a certain pretty young maid. They were wary of Gristle, telling their friends not to take a bite of her fruity wares. Over on the west cliff, Onk knew nothing of Gristle's arrival. Hearty, however, had been getting that prickling sensation, telling him all was not well. He felt a responsibility to Onk, self-imposed, he knew, but it didn't lessen his concerns. He and Shine sat in her home, discussing what to do. Hearty had a distinct feeling who, or whatever, was chasing them, was back on their trail. his trembling wingtips alert to impending danger. "Well, there is the West Wood," Shine suggested, when all her other ideas were met with resistance. Hearty's ears picked up. "The West Wood?" he asked, interested. "Yes, it's supposed to be enchanted. Folk avoid it because it's difficult for magic to function there. Any magic attempted isn't stable. It doesn't operate how it should once the boundary has been crossed. And that would be helpful to us because—" Hearty couldn't help noticing Shine's beautiful blue pool-like eyes. Funny, he'd become used to them for a while, and now it was like seeing her for the first time. He stared. "Because," she answered, shaking his arm, "because it would be impossible to fight Onk using magic if what I've heard about the place is true, you nincompoop," she went on, giggling at Hearty's infatuated expression. "Oh," he responded, the look reappearing on his face. She shook him again, harder this time, till his wings curled. "Oh, yeah, right, where were we?" He started up. "Well, I was offering a clever solution, and you were staring like you were going to be sick," she answered tartly. "No, I wasn't," he replied, embarrassed. Then he spoilt his statement by turning the deepest shade of pink to the very ends of his perfect ears, which began to wiggle, while his wingtips curled and uncurled. Shine grinned, and Hearty looked deep into her eyes. In Ramsgate, the West Cliff still looked like a post-war zone. The remains of partly eaten or decomposing sea creatures and their attendant scavengers were still scattered across the esplanade. Foragers ranged from rodents and cats to seagulls and the odd human. The stench was so atrocious, butterflies were avoiding the area, and they don't even have noses. Groups of local authority rubbish collecting teams were doing their best to clear the debris throughout the afternoon, while scores of police kept back the growing crowd, intent on observing the clean-up operation first hand. The ever-helpful cry of "Oi, you've missed a bit, mate," resounded around the lawns. This comment was met with waves of raucous laughter from the gawpers and hangers-on. Muttered comments fell from the lips of people assigned to clear up the mess, in double-quick time, but on their regular hourly rate. Short-sighted council members, with by-elections close to hand, wanted the island's tourists and residents happy. They weren't bothered about staff satisfaction, forgetting they were voters too. Later that afternoon, much later, Hearty's party left for the West Wood. 65 minutes before Gristle arrived on the West Cliff esplanade. Her outbursts were increasing in magnitude, with each frustrated attempt to kill the troll and capture the fairy. She knew the blasted troll had been seen plodding around the West Cliff, and not long ago. She was seething, a sure sign she was losing it permanently. The apocalyptic sight of almost 50% of the watery denizens of the English Channel being dumped without ceremony onto the West Cliff paled into insignificance following Gristle's vengeful performance that early evening in late September. She outdid herself. A certain sign she was or had tipped over the proverbial lunacy edge. The West Cliff had always been a peaceful place of idyllic green lawns, walkways and shrubberies, where locals walked their dogs, their children, or both. It existed no more. The landscape was redefined, as if Mother Earth, discontent with her earlier result, had decided to start over with a massive earth remodelling project and work upwards. At the sight of the first wide swathe of green grass where couples like Grace and John giggled and kissed on a Sunday evening and dogs chased frisbees. A gigantic, bubbling black tar pit, complete with thunderous rude noises and hideous cabbage smells, sprang into being. Beyond this spread an alien vista unrecognisable as Thanet, and without equal anywhere on earth for the last 1,000,000 years. In the middle of the Royal Esplanade, on the site of a well-established family-run cafe with amusement arcade, kiddies' play area and boating pool, stood a seething mini volcano, complete with flowing red lava and magma pools. No more would that green puddle of water carry excitable children in pedalos, while mallard ducks, herring seagulls and bored parents looked on in faint amusement. On second thoughts, perhaps the volcano section was a slight improvement on the boating pool for new tourists. It brought in the crowds. Several film crews arrived to report on the phenomena, and some filmed their outside sci-fi shots there. Media spokespersons stood in front of the spectacle, expounding theories on the origin of the scenery. A number blamed recent change in weather patterns. Others cited similar events throughout history, neglecting to mention these never occurred in England, let alone Thanet, but in exotic, out-of-the-way places on the other side of the world. True, Thanet was on the other side of the world, the other side, that is, from those other exotic places. Several specialists were flown into the island by private jet, landing at Manston Airport during the course of the next 2 weeks. 2 notable scientists, one from Helsinki, the other from Hawaii, both experts in volcanology, came to explain their own theories of the event. The island never received so much attention before or since, unless one counted the unsuccessful attempts to demolish Margate Pier in the 1980s, or the advertising of London's third airport 72 miles from the capital. The idiot crew received their second call in as many days regarding Gristle via a rain-drenched bird. They decided after a long team meeting that they needed to call in the heavy guns and some reinforcements, especially as their previous encounter hadn't gone by the rule book. A willing magpie had been dispatched by worried Thanet residents on the West Cliff with a request for immediate help. The team decided it was their duty to respond with sufficient firepower. They'd heard about Gru's hovel being torched, but it wasn't company policy to get involved in domestic arguments between witches. Better to leave them to sort each other out, save the idiot crew the bother. They all agreed. This situation was designated a Class 4 second grade call-out by the team, one of the higher risk categories. It required the summoning of a second grade wizard off the duty rota, hence the title. These were not wizards with their own practices, but new wizards seeking first employment positions or disgraced individuals trying to re-establish their magical credentials. Both needed the experience and the small wage the work brought in before they could apply or reapply for the Wizarding Practitioner Committee, the WPC, for inclusion onto the Learned Ledger of Wizards, the LLOW. Each area took a letter of the Greek alphabet, and East Kent was Pi. When they secured a ranking on the ledger, they could obtain a junior position in a wizarding practice, either under a senior first class wizard or within a community magic centre of practicing wizard teams and their associated department. The Wet Magpie was commissioned to fly on to the regional headquarters at Southborough and pass on their Rota Wizard request. Prior to Gristle's arrival, A multitude of persons, human and non-human, had been scouring the ground for the easiest catch of the day. Much of that catch was gone, taken home by most to enjoy a special fish supper with the family. The odd, sad shrimp or pathetic, poorly prawn were all that remained, lying in forlorn hope of a high tide never to come. Gristle left behind her creative lesson in Landscaping 101 and went in search of food too. She wasn't partial to seafood. She'd noticed, after an explosive show of magical energy, she tended to be low in the calorie department. The local feline population sat fat and happy and well out of harm's or Gristle's way. Luxuriating in full bellies, they licked themselves silly in that slow, methodical way cats have when they're about to fall into a deep, cat-like snooze. They looked much like middle-aged fathers on Sunday afternoons, napping in their favourite armchair after a gargantuan roast dinner with all the trimmings. Though in their case, going down the pub prior to dinner might have had more to do with their nap than the meal. The food was the proverbial icing on the cake. A quick intake of protein was what Gristle needed. Stewed rabbit was her favourite. It was something she'd seen very few of since reaching Thanet. She assumed that, like her, the local inhabitants were partial to rabbit suppers. She decided to do them a favour and increase the local rabbit population, and she thought she had an idea how to achieve it. On the way to the West Cliff, she'd spotted a recently built shopping centre. Lazy locals, unwilling to keep English names and titles correct, shortened it to The Cross. With her amazing speedy gait and uncanny sense of direction, it wasn't long before Gristle found Westwood Cross again. It was situated straight down the end of Hayne Road, a blaze of red and green neon lights in the early evening, almost begging to become a second smorgasbord. Setting up camp in one of the shops, which coincidentally specialised in camping and outdoor activities, Gristle began the grisly process of altering people into lower food life forms, starting with the store staff. She spread her spell till much of the cross teemed with rabbits, hopping, whiffling, and generally getting under other folks' feet, or in unfortunate cases, under their wheels. The rapid rise in rabbits was startling, for as Gristle had discovered, rabbits were rare in Thanet, except on the empty road verges between it and the rest of the world. The cute explosion of cuddliness distracted families, particularly those with young children, so much so that shoppers failed to notice the faint plume of white smoke issuing from the camping store. The area smelt of rabbit casserole long after the cross closed up for the night. Inside, Gristle hummed a happy ditty, anticipating with glee her impromptu meal. She was cooking it on the small camping stove she'd found on the shelves. She was content with her numerous castings. A long line of dead bunnies hung by their feet across the inside display area. The store would never recover from Gristle's attentions, going out of business soon after her visit. As usual, people didn't notice its demise until a clothing store opened some weeks later on the same site. And that's where we're going to leave it this time. Not much longer to go. It's getting exciting. I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.